Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to DirectXbox number 15. And what an episode here with just the wild week in gaming. And it's not even about any one individual game. It's just the amount of stuff happening when it comes to sort of the back end of all of this is I mean, there's some stuff happening this week that I didn't think I'd ever see actually take place. So of course had to bring in the usual Nate the Hate, help me break it all down. How you doing tonight, Nate?
I am doing well tonight, though it is blistery cold this evening, and I just got a haircut,
Is
so
it?
I have less insulation than I normally would have.
You got a haircut. Your hair like extra short. At one point, was it during the pandemic when it was like you got to let it get really long?
Yeah, I got a haircut in February of 2020, and then I didn't cut my hair again until December of 2022.
Jeez. You got like the crew cut now. Is it like super close to your scalp now?
I was gonna do a fade, but I didn't have faith in the stylist to do a fade well,
Mm.
so I ended up just going on the sides at like a 3. I
You looked
figure
him up and down and
that's
judged him from the chair.
Yeah, she just didn't look like she was going to have good fade ability in her hands and wrist. I was like,
Mm.
I'm going to go with a 3. If you cut it a little too short, I can deal with that. If it's too long, that's okay. I can always go shorter elsewhere. So I'm generally happy with the product that she produced.
Okay. Well, that's good. It's good to hear. How cold is it over there?
I mean, it's seasonal. We're probably in about the 30s, but it's still very
Oh yeah,
windy. So it's just that
yeah.
wind chill is really a
That's what
killer right now.
it's like mid 30s here right now, but when that wind kicks in, it's all of a sudden it's single digits out of nowhere. So I get it. I get it. I'm hoping we're in March now. I'm hoping we starts to warm up a little bit. I'm ready for that. It's one of those things where you're in winter for so long, you're like I'm ready for the heat, but then you get into the heat for like a month, you're like I'm ready for winter again. So it's just Northeast living is can be kind of
Yeah, I
annoying.
mean, but that's the thing. Last week we had days where we were close to 60, and then the next
Yeah,
day
it
it was
was yeah.
20.
Yeah, and my room here gets like I have like all these electronics, so it's like trying to just balance in here is tough when it's already like all over the place out there.
Mm.
Yep, cool. Everyone piling in here. Shout out to everyone. How we doing tonight? I do want to give a shout out to some of the patrons over there supporting the show. Of course, if you would like to support the show as well, you can check out patreon.com/spawncast or spawncast.com, spawncastnetwork.com. We have some of the executive producers I wanted to shout out, as well as Trent A, who's a producer over there, William Hogue, Mr. Joby, Joshua Butts, John O, Achievement. And look at some of the star supporters too. We have Drunk on Tacos. We have just the letter A. So shout out to the letter A Billion Cats, Adam Baldizin, then Adam Sharp. And of course, we have the Game Orb, who continues to sponsor the show. Actually, all the different shows on the Spawncast currently. You can check them out. We have their link down below, where they do a bunch of different convention tours. Also, all kinds of gameplay for different titles over on Twitch. So make sure you check them out. That's youtube.com/the Game Orb 2823. So, as I mentioned, it was a week. A lot of stuff happened. And you kind of alluded to some of this stuff as well, Nate. Not even just quietly, that you were like on different message boards saying things were going to get kind of rough this week. I think you mentioned 505 games, if I'm not mistaken. That was one you mentioned. But
Yes.
the pieces were in place, and we've kind of seen this entire thing playing out in slow motion now for a bit. It's almost like does it feel like every week there's just more layoffs? Like there's some kind of layoff announcement happening. Like I almost feel like in Newswave, I have to make a section recently for just layoffs that have taken place.
It's definitely every week, if not every day. And unfortunately, it's going to continue throughout the month of March as the fiscal year is coming to an end and more companies are going to look to consolidate. So the layoff news is really just breaking at this point. It's going to be a continuous thing for the weeks to come and likely throughout 2024. This is just the reality of the industry right now as the corporations, VCs, everyone involved with them, they're looking to save money because the cost of games are so high, the profit margins are so minimal. And then we have those licensing fees, which we kind of got a glimpse into how EA is going to be backing away from licensed IP. And due to the Insomniac leak, we saw how much Insomniac or Sony had to pay to Disney to use the character of Spider-Man and Miles Morales in their games. And it was no small fee. So the industry is definitely at a point of transition, and unfortunately, layoffs are going to continue to come. And I wouldn't be too surprised if we see a few studio closures before the fiscal year concludes the end of this month.
Oh, Georgie's here. Shout out to Georgie. Shout out to Georgie. They're they like you, Nate. I guess we can start with just the amount of layoffs that did take place, and they were all obviously impactful because they're all people's jobs here at stake that are in the news. But Sony was the one that probably garnered the most headlines because it's one of the major platform holders, obviously. But Sony announced that they were laying off 300 different positions, different people. And it seemed to be spread across multiple, like it wasn't just any one studio that was necessarily affected, although they did shut down PlayStation or London studios. So they're just closed entirely, which apparently means that I guess they had a project that was in the works. It was a fantasy co-op game that they were making. London Studio has been around for a long time too. That's the one I was like, oh wow, okay, they made The Getaway back on the PS2. So it's a storied studio, storied developer. There are also reductions in Gorilla and Fire Sprite. We heard Insomniac was affected, Naughty Dog, technology, creative support team. So it was pretty much spread across the entirety of PlayStation itself. And that was as Herman Holst was discussing this. Jim Ryan talked about it, and they like to put in the percentages. So it's like 8%. And they're like, oh, okay. And then they say, oh, that means 900 people. It's like, whoa, it's more than I thought. But the issue with Jim Ryan is this guy, like 5 days before the announcement, he was at least taking a picture with London Studio, and they were all excited. The picture of his face on a cookie was making the rounds. That's not really a good look for Jim. What'd you think about that, Nate, when you saw Jim face on the cookie picture? That not great.
Yeah, it's not a great look from an optic standpoint where you're celebrating with these people and then less than a week later you're laying off a sizable percentage of them. It's the unfortunate reality the industry's in right now. It's just pure turmoil. It's dark.
It was cold. It was cold, man. That's some cold stuff to see that. And apparently Fire Sprite was going through it as well. They were shedding talent because of like workplace issues. So this is kind of rough on Sony's part. I mean, it really plays into the entirety of just the industry as a whole, seemingly going. It just kind of feels like, so as we go through these different layoffs, the big question, of course, comes up as the industry going through some sort of breaking point. People have said crash. I don't think we're at crash status yet, but it's reset, maybe reorganization. I guess that's what we could call it, because along with Sony, Embracer is shedding a ton of their assets now. I mean, we know that they went through it because their $2 billion deal fell through, but to be honest, that could be kind of part of all of this, as investment in general in gaming has kind of taking a step back. It's kind of drying up right now. So Embracer put in that position, selling off Saber Interactive. Apparently they're just going private now. And Gearbox is set to, at least according to Kotaku, they're set to leave next in some sort of deal, whether it's financed or I don't know. Does Gearbox buy their own freedom, basically? But along with that, KOTOR, the hope is still alive, Nate, with KOTOR. The hope is still alive. But Embracer will look a whole lot different without Saber and Gearbox.
Yeah, I mean, Embracer, I'd say those were probably two of their more prolific acquisitions going back in the day when they made them. Because when you look at Saber and all of their subsections, it includes developers like Aspire. There's a lot of talent underneath that Saber brand that now Embracer will not house.
Apparently, they can decide who they take with them. Apparently, they can decide who they take with them, Nate, is according to Bloomberg. Like, they're going to have their choice of subsidiaries. I kind of feel like you take Aspire with you, though, if you're a Saber.
Yeah, they can do some of those HD remasters, and there's definitely
Hmm?
value in having those types
Well,
of
we'll see how Battlefront
releases.
turns out.
Yeah, you got the Battlefront. You just had
We'll see how
Tomb
that goes.
Raider. So, I
Tomb
mean,
Raider was good.
ideally you would take them, but at the same time, did you only have access to Tomb Raider because of Embracer's ownership of the
Mm,
IP? So what will you
that's a good
lose
question.
in this transfer? Is Saber going to go back to kind of being that remastering studio that we saw them do a lot of Switch ports? Are they going to go? Are they going to, kind of retort to that form
Hmm.
again, or are they going to be a very active, try to do original projects? Because they did do some original stuff. They had things like NBA Playground earlier this generation. So you kind of have to wonder, what is the future for Saber going to look like? And it's really uncertain. And if they're going to continue that development work on KOTOR, I'd say a lot is leaning on that. If that game does finish development and let's say it is subpar, that could be the end of Saber. If they have to potentially cancel it while it's in development, they're going to run into financial issues. So this is definitely a risky move on Saber's part, but they're gambling on themselves. They must have confidence that they can deliver and that they have a future. And hey, good luck to you if you're willing to bet on yourself in such a big way.
Saber's pretty. They've been pretty good though, and they're made up of 3,500 employees, so they have a pretty sizable workforce for not just, I guess, KOTOR remake in this case, but maybe they could do like you mentioned, ports, some support work, different things just to keep revenue flowing. Just because they do have that experience and seemingly the just the number of people to get it done. But you're right. If they do KOTOR correctly, and I'm not even saying it has to be game of the year, but if it comes out and it's like, oh, well, this is good, then I almost wonder if there's more of a relationship there that can form with Marvel and Star Wars and just Disney in general. Because well, EA was also in the news and they're seemingly taking a step back from Disney as they're laying off 670 employees. And the thing that was mentioned in their write up, seemingly from Andrew Wilson, who's CEO at EA, is that they are going to look more inward and not necessarily do this licensing stuff as much. Like they want to focus in on, I guess, their own established intellectual properties, sports games. So they'll at least stick with that, with like FIFA and or not FIFA, with what do they have, FC now, and they're going to stick, I assume, with NHL and NFL, the established brands there. And they also mentioned massive online communities. Battlefield apparently is still sticking around, but the Mandalorian game is reportedly canceled. Like that's out. So
That's
reorganization at EA as well.
Yeah, like the cancellation of the Mandalorian game definitely stands out because that feels as though it would be a surefire hit. Star Wars is very popular. The Mandalorian show is one of the bigger success stories on Disney Plus, so that just feels as though that's an easy type of release for a company like EA, but they must have seen something that didn't give them confidence and they had to make that hard decision of canceling it. But their pivot from licensed games to going to their own established IP is interesting because when you think of the IPs that you associate to EA, it's largely
Mhm.
sports. What other IPs do you really think of in terms of EA ownership for like legacy? Mass Effect and Dragon Age, Battlefield, and what?
Um, yeah, that's true. That's a good point. They don't. They're unfortunately Mass Effect got buried, and that's really unfortunate because I feel like Mass Effect. If you think about it, Mass Effect and Assassin's Creed came up at the same time during that 360 generation.
Hmm.
Mass Effect should be on the same level as that. Like they should be able to look at a Mass Effect game and be like, okay, this is going to carry us. Like they should have it like Ubisoft has Assassin's Creed position, where they can just make. They apparently have like 10 Assassin's Creed games in development. I feel like that's what EA should have been able to pull off with Mass Effect. And they didn't, unfortunately. It died just about. Now they're trying to revive it. And apparently that's so far off. That might be next generation at this point. I don't know. Apparently it's still in like early production and they're just trying to get Dragon Age out at this point.
Yeah, I think a lot is going to ride on Dragon Age. I think Dragon Age has to be pretty much a major success for EA at this point to continue to fund BioWare type projects because I feel if Dragon Age comes out and let's say it underperforms in terms of sale and revenue and such, if you're EA and you're already making cuts, are you going to begin to look at BioWare and say, we have to do layoffs, or we're going to sell you? We will sell you to, a Microsoft, a Sony, or maybe another third
Mm,
party publishing house that can do you well, because we know BioWare has talent. But what was the last great BioWare game? Mass Effect 3, Dragon Age Inquisition? We're going back nearly what,
yeah.
7, 8 years since their last truly groundbreaking game? That's a long time for a studio that does have a lot of talent, but Mass Effect Andromeda was such a mess
Dragon
that
Age Inquisition is 10 years ago.
a decade since
Yep.
their last great release is just baffling because, as you said, when Mass Effect 1 came to the Xbox 360, that was kind of that generation defining moment for a Western style RPG. It was, whoa, look at this team. And they had a lot of great releases before Mass Effect, going back to something like Jade Empire on the original Xbox. A fantastic game that unfortunately has never been HD'd or remastered or remade. I wish they
Hmm.
would. They never will.
That'd be
And they also
interesting.
had that curious Sonic game for the DS that
Oh
everyone was
gosh. Oh,
very
that's
confused
right.
about.
What was that called? Oh, I know what you're talking about. I can
Yeah,
picture
was
in
it
my mind right now.
Sonic Dark Chronicles or something?
Oh yeah. That is weird. Well, they try something different. Why not? It's like that's what people ask for some of these studios sometimes is to break the monotony and apparently make a Sonic game on the DS. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, EA, I want to see how EA really pivots because the EA you and I grew up with is a lot different than the EA that people are familiar with today. They
Yeah,
had their license IP
challenge
back then.
everything.
Yeah, they had license IP. They did the Lord of the Rings games, which were fantastic.
Those are good. Good games.
You had NBA Street, FIFA Street,
Good
NHL.
games.
You had these arcadey type experiences. Are they going to maybe consider going back to an NBA Street style game if they want to go to
EA
these
big.
established IP? Are they going to go to Titanfall? Are they going to go to
Mm.
something like Mirror's Edge? Are they like what are you going to pivot to? Because you've made Mirror's Edge last
Mhm.
generation and it did okay. It wasn't a runaway success story. But you've also downsized some of these development studios who had previously worked on these IP. So where are you going to go with this? I'm definitely curious the direction EA is going to move into the future, or if they're truly doubling down on what made them the name they are, which is Madden and some of their sport franchises. I mean, ideally, they continue to expand. They can, I guess, find new ways to make Battlefield exciting and relevant in the modern gaming landscape. But how many years is that going to take?
I'm trying to think of like weird stuff. I mean, like things that could be on the double A level. Could they revive or redo SSX? Is that even possible? Uh,
I mean,
that's
is
I
it
think
possible? Yes. But is
yeah.
SSX going to be a game that would find an audience in
Hmm.
2024? And that's the thing. I feel as though there's a lot of franchises that you and I grew up with that were fantastic during that era, but they wouldn't necessarily translate well to the gaming landscape of today. And you can even
Yeah.
look at NBA Jam. They brought that back on the Wii and the Xbox 360 PS3. But would NBA Jam resonate with the modern audience, or would you have to do it as more of a digital game that's priced at $15 to $20? And even
Probably
if you
that.
went that route, is there going to be enough content to keep the gamer satisfied for the long term, or is it just going to be that game you play for a month or two and then you move on from it? And if that is the case, if you're EA, are you going to look at that and say, can we justify a development budget of 25, $30 million on such a small release, or are we better off investing that into a bigger release where ideally we can make a lot more money via loot boxes and microtransactions and such? So I'm really curious how they approach this because I would love a new, NBA Jam. I just don't know if the audience is there for it right now.
Yeah, that my thing is how is it better to make one $200 million or $300 million at this point, really, but like $200 million AAA project that you bet it all on, or is it better to make four $50 million games and try some different, unique things there, and hope that one of those hits or two of them hit and maybe two of them don't? That it's tough right now because the big budget games they still work if they hit, but man, if they miss, they hurt. Like Anthem, that
Hmm.
hurt BioWare so bad. Oh my gosh, that did some damage.
Hmm.
So I think that's the biggest
It's
problem now. I just feel like we're seeing such a reliance on these massive budget games that it almost feels like there's nothing in between that these publishers should be targeting. And I feel like it should be a
mhm,
mix of both, but I almost think that these big budget games should they should definitely be scarce, and we should have more room for some of these smaller games that come out, and they don't have to be open world 50-hour experiences. They could come out at $40 and they could be a fun 10-hour semi-linear experience,
mhm.
and you just move on. They're good quality, not like you don't need every single plant off on the side to be interactive or anything that like that's the thing. I think scope is the biggest problem because that leads to some of these budgets that are just impossible to control or overcome. So it's always been an arms race with this stuff, but now it feels like it's impossible unless you're Grand Theft Auto or Zelda or I guess technically you could say like Witcher or something like that. Like you have to have that brand name. So I understand why EA is becoming incredibly conservative now, and they're probably just going to lean in on stuff they know. And unfortunately, that means there's probably not going to be much creativity in terms of new intellectual properties, not as much as we've had in the past for the industry. I feel like that's going to see a bit of a reduction.
You see, I think they could potentially now get creative again because if you're moving away from that licensed IP, and
Hmm.
ideally this does mean lower budgets on games because you're going to try that experimental 10 to 15-hour game, that you're going to look to your development studio and those creatives and say, what new idea have you had just in the back of your mind? Create a vertical slice. Let's see these ideas. And we might be willing to greenlight it because the investment is going to be so minimal that we can do those four $50 million games. And if one hits and it turns into a game that generates $700 million in revenue, that's going to be something you're going to look to and say, okay, let's continue down this path versus doing that $500 million game that in turn makes $750 million, but you only had a profit of $200 million after covering development, marketing, and all those other fees. So potentially, maybe EA is looking to go back into some of those creative ideas that they once blossomed with during the PS1 and PlayStation 2 generation before they became so risk adverse in the latter half of the 360 and Xbox One generations, where they just churned out the Madden games and very safe type projects. Go back to risk because the EA prior to this week probably would not have greenlit a project like Mass Effect. That would have been viewed as too much of a risk, I feel.
Right. I it's going to be I would love to see them go, you know what, let's get weird with it. We have Battlefield. We're going to work on that still. We have the Maddens and the FCs, the ones that churn the money with, let's be real, the casual audience. Let's see what we can make happen here, and if it takes off, great. If not, we didn't lose a ton of money. I think the days of trying to make another Anthem are over for EA, and I would downsize their projects and look towards some smaller stuff. I do think that is the way to go for them, and I hope they do hit on something like a new Mass Effect, not like exactly like, but like a new kind of game like that, where it just sort of comes out of nowhere. It's really good, and then they just kind of build on it over time. So that's the approach I'd like to see from EA, but we'll see. Oh, also, you know what's interesting about this, Nate? As we're going to go into two studios that I guess technically for them had good news. Not 505 Games, of course. 505 Games, as you alluded to, shuttered multiple offices. But it seemed like as part of the cost cutting measure for 505, they sold the whole rights for Control to Remedy. So they basically bought out the rights
Hmm.
for it. And it was like $18 million, something like that. It wasn't like an
Yeah, it wasn't
overwhelming amount of
much.
money.
Yeah, I believe the statement Remedy had put out made it clear that that was around the cost that 505 had invested into the project or somewhere around that area. So they essentially, paid back what was put in. But that is a fantastic deal for Remedy to get that ownership back of their IP because we know what their ambitions are with Control. We know they're making a sequel. We know they have that multiplayer game. And with 505 now shuttering every office in Europe, and I would say that their future at this point is questionable at best, it's good to
Mhm.
know that Control will continue on. you could definitely make a case of how healthy is Remedy at this point, but so far they haven't done any layoffs or anything, so there's no immediate cause for concern. But it's very good for Remedy to just have that ownership back and they can continue to work on these IPs. And, if they have to reach out to an external publishing partner, be it, a Microsoft, a Take-Two, Sony, whomever, to make the game a reality, at least they have that option. It's not trapped away in the clutches of a company that, has no intent of using it. Yes, I'm talking about you, Microsoft and Quantum Break.
Well, they
Either.
now they have Control 2 and they have Condor in development. That's their multiplayer game in that universe. So, and it
Mhm.
feels like that's been in development for a little while now. So maybe they've moved along well enough to where they think that they can get both of these launched themselves. That
Ideally,
would be
because
interesting.
we know they're also working on the Max Payne 1 and 2 remakes as well.
Yeah,
So
they got a lot going on over there.
they have a lot in that, development locker of theirs. And after seeing the visual fidelity of Alan Wake 2, I
Mhm.
need to see what Max Payne 1 and 2 are going to look like.
Yeah, as much as it wasn't clicking with me the whole way through. Those parts where it was kind of like, okay, is this sort of what Max Payne's going to kind of be like? Because they obviously played into it a few times with one of the characters.
Hmm.
But the thing with Remedy I'll give them is they do make the games that I'm thinking of, because they've discussed the budget for some of these titles, like $50 million, $25 million, and they come out looking like a Control or like an Alan Wake's, that sort of thing. I'm like, okay, this is about where I think it's more manageable. And they keep putting games out that are doing really well with reviewers. And I think their next couple of games are going to be really good as well. And I hope they stay that course to where they make games that you
Hmm.
start, you play, and then it's over. And that's it. Like, it doesn't have to be some crazy thing where they're like, okay, now we're going to give you enough content for no reason at all to make you play this for another 50 hours. It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
they just tell
okay.
that very succinct story in a single package. And that's what Remedy has done so well, dating back to their Genesis with, like with Max Payne 1. They just give you that contained experience. And that's what makes Remedy kind of stand out in the modern gaming landscape so much, is that they still very much feel as though they are a development studio from the late 90s, early 2000s, and they haven't changed much in terms of their in house formula. They know what they do well and they continue to do it. And that's why when they announce a new game, it gets people attention. They want to see what Remedy is doing. You know you're going to get just a very tight experience. Now, the multiplayer game, that's going to be a new thing for them. We've really never seen them do that. So whether or not that game will be a success for them, that remains to be seen, but it's definitely a thing that people are going to have a lot of attention when the day comes to see what is Remedy's take on multiplayer, especially in the Control universe. That could be very creative and very interesting if you have all those powers and such at play. And I'm just curious how they're going to approach it in general, because outside of Max Payne, you could definitely make the case that shooting isn't exactly Remedy's strongest gameplay attribute.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, I mean, Control isn't bad, but Alan, okay, I see what you mean for like Alan Wake 2. But
Hmm.
I got faith in them for Max Payne. They've done it before. It's a completely different kind of game. It's it's faster, more arcade like. So we'll see how their engine reacts to that now compared to when I bought it on Windows XP or something. That's it was a while ago. It was a while ago.
Long,
Uh,
long time.
I do also want to point out here, Nate, something else that we've discussed quite a bit, and it's coming to the forefront, obviously, with all these layoffs and cancellations for different games, and the the budgets that we see ballooning for a lot of these projects, the layoffs that are happening now, the layoffs. Some have kind of brought up the idea, of course, that a lot of these companies became pretty bloated during the pandemic, and there were some very unrealistic forecasts that were put out there with investors because the belief was things would still go in that trajectory, which is, I mean, for a lot of us, we look at it and we're like, that doesn't make any sense. But it seemed like that was kind of being pushed. And maybe it's to try to look better to the investors so they just get more money from it. And they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna keep selling all these copies of the games because people are just always going to be at home now, and it's just going to work that way. Monthly active users will continue to be spiking upwards, And it kind of feels like right now that's not happening. And a lot of the money, investors' money is kind of leaving. And that's where we are with these layoffs. So is that kind of what you're thinking here looking at this, Nate? Is overhiring took place, unrealistic budgets were set by some of the higher ups, a lot of the suits, and
Mhm.
unfortunately, we see a lot of developers get laid off because of it.
Generally, yeah, I think it was just that ballooning of hiring. And then you did have those VCs, you had the executive types thinking that they were just going to continue to sit on a river of money. And then that river dried up fairly fast for them, and they weren't prepared for it. And now that's leading to layoffs. And in some of these cases, these layoffs are not necessary. They're only happening because these VC types are worried about their profits and they're looking to minimize their risk and loss. So, in a lot of these cases, these layoffs do not need to happen. It's just, corporate, it's business. They don't want to lose money as executives and shareholders and such. So, the easiest way to alleviate that is to, quote unquote, trim the fat of a business and lay off individuals. Because we can look at the recent Sony layoffs. We've seen the success of Spider Man 2, 10 million copies sold. Yet Insomniac had to endure layoffs this week? Doesn't
Yeah,
make
that
any
was
sense.
interesting. That was an interesting one. When I saw that, I was like, Insomniac, really? They're Insomniac's working on. They just got done Spider-Man 2. They're working on, we believe, a Venom standalone game. They're working on Wolverine, and then their whole roadmap is like a bunch of Marvel stuff, and there's new Ratchet stuff. Like they're pretty well set for like the next. It sounds crazy, but the next decade, basically,
Yeah, in
of
terms
game
of project, they're pretty
releases.
well set, but those are a lot of licensed projects, and we saw how much Insomniac has to pay Disney to use these characters. It was in the area of 75 to $100 million for Miles Morales. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah, that's something else. The so the obvious expense that is really what leans into a lot of these budgets is just labor, just cost of having developers, because people break it down online in like very basic terms. Like if you have 200 developers and they're all getting paid $100,000, then they do the math and it's like, okay, here you go, you're on the other side of 6 years of development. It's 200 some odd $1 million, right out of nowhere. It's like, oh wow, okay.
Hmm.
And then you got to get the licensing on top, and then all of a sudden you turn around and Spider-Man 2 costs $315 million to make, and that is actually well up apparently from the first one. Now, the first one, we're not 100% sure how much it cost to get done, but the remaster was like $40 million to get done, and Ratchet and Clank
Yeah.
Rift Apart was almost 80 million, which I actually looked at that and said, you know what? Okay, for the fidelity, the like that's not like you see 315 that jumps off the paper. It's like, okay, that's under $200 million in this world. It's like that's about right. But I don't
Hmm.
I look at Spider-Man 1 on the PS4. You could even say obviously on the PS5. It's going to look, you could tack the 40 million onto whatever the first one cost. I think you're still well under half of what the second one costs to make. And I just
Yeah.
don't know if I look at that and go, "Yep, that's $150 million more well spent." I
No,
don't
you
see
don't.
it.
I didn't. I definitely did not. I mean, Spider Man 2 is a good game. It looks great, runs very well, has a lot of unique ideas going for it, but you cannot tell me that was a $200 million improvement over the first game. If it was, I don't know where it is.
Yeah.
Like, you
I
refined
think
the
that
systems from the first game, you
mhm.
added a few new things here or there. Like, yes, you added a lot of NPCs in the buildings themselves. So when you're scaling the walls and looking through the windows, you do see people in their apartments. You had more traffic and congestion on the streets of New York City and Queens and some of the outlying boroughs that you can visit. But I would still say, in many ways, it didn't feel as though you were in a living, breathing city. The city is largely a backdrop to what you are doing at the time of the game. So, where did this $200 million extra investment go? I don't see it.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like it was that big of a leap from the first one in terms of any game design, direction, scope, anything. It was just a largely refined project.
So, I mean, yeah, you look at it and I wonder if just in general across the industry, if we are getting up against that that ceiling for visuals to where you gotta weigh out the cost versus the results. And I almost wonder if something like you mentioned, NPCs being more lively inside of these buildings costs an extra $10 million if you just go, no, no, we don't need that. Yeah, things like that that are just they're yes, they're nice details to have, but you weigh it out and you go, I don't think it's worth necessarily. Like, are we to that point where the games look good enough and they for the most part can tell the story well enough?
Mhm.
Does it have to go up another 100 million to make certain aspects look shinier or move better or something? I almost
No.
wonder if just the mainstream and even most people who are playing these games or are really plugged in are kind of like, you know what, that game looks good. It looks good enough. I don't really know where else we
Mhm.
go from here, or if it's even going to be noticeable to most people.
That's the thing. Like, if nobody pointed it out in a video because they stopped moving Peter Parker and said, "Oh, look at this guy sitting on his couch eating a taco in Spider-Man 2," would you know? Would you notice
No, I
that?
wouldn't.
Because how often are you stopping your character to pan around the apartments that you are, positioned on, that you're prone on? It's going to be very rare. The only reason I would see any developer want to do that level of detail would maybe be for a multi-platform release because you'd want the parity across all versions just to avoid a console fan war where one would say, look, the Xbox version has a couch and the PlayStation 5 version has a futon. That's because it can't render the couch. Be like, okay, like we don't need that. But I think we have moved on from that age of those little extra bells and whistles just for the sake of it. You don't need them. Like they're cool to be there. It's a nice touch, but they don't add anything to the experience. Having the woman do jumping jacks in her apartment in Spider-Man 2, it didn't make the game more immersive. There were other things you could do to add immersion to a game beyond watching an NPC through a wall you can't interact with. Just have it as Spider-Man 2. It was just a window with a reflection. That's enough.
Yeah, like there are certain games I'll play and you'll notice where they cut a corner. Like as an example, Rebirth. Right now, I'm playing it when a character is handed something in a cutscene. They do it just off camera, so you don't see the thing being handed to them or the hand animation of them grabbing it. And I'm
Hmm.
like, I noticed that, but I don't really care. It's fine. Like that's me noticing. I'm sure there's plenty of people who don't even think about it, but it's like stuff like that that I go, it's you know what, that probably was a good spot to save money on something there. Whereas, yeah,
Hmm.
Naughty Dog might go, you know what, we gotta animate it perfectly, and it's got to be and that's great that you care so much about it. But Hiroki Totoki himself said, SMB Studios are kind of out of control right now. We got to rein this in. So he's the numbers guy. He's not the art guy. And I kind of think just in general, that is to me what I think the reset is going to be. Because I don't think we're in a crash. I think we're in kind of a reorganization phase where a lot of
Yeah.
the top executives are going to look around and be like, okay, hold on a minute. Like I get the art side, but like, how much does the paint cost exactly? And does it need to cost that much?
Yeah, we're in a recession where everything is going to be revisited and say, where can we scale down? Where can we revise what we are doing? And where can we save money on these projects? Removing this feature, is it going to have any detrimental effect? No? Okay, then we don't need to continue to invest in it and waste, let's say, 6 months and $10 million on that feature that no one is going to use or no one is going to notice as that background effect. And you can look to like racing games where yes, Digital Foundry will make their videos. You'll have people do still shots and say, "Oh, the trees disappear after you drive by them." Well, I can't see the trees once I drive by it, so that's fine. Wouldn't you rather have the tree disappear than waste 6 months and potentially millions of dollars ensuring that the trees are rendered behind the car that you can't see?
Yeah. Yeah, to me that's the biggest thing is the expectation I feel like has kind of hit a ceiling or a topping. But and look, somebody's going to come in and blow it up again. And I feel like that'll probably be Rockstar with Grand Theft Auto 6. That's going to do something. I feel like that I mean it's going to be cool when it comes out. I kind of feel like that's going to affect the industry in I don't say a negative way because it's going to be really cool to see what they're able to pull off. And it's like, all right, look at the top tier talent, what they can do. But it is going to kind of have people look at that and then turn and look at all the other companies and go, okay, what can you do that's better than this? And it's like, oh well, back to the arms race. And it's I don't mind the idea of games stepping back a bit in terms of what they put out graphically or build out on the world. If the game comes out in a reasonable time and it's just fun, I see people playing Power World all the time, and some joke about it looking like an Unreal Engine asset flip. And it's like, yeah, but there's like an addictive, fun nature to it, and that's really what it comes down to in the first place. A game can look visually average, but if it's just fun, people will just keep playing it, and that's what you want out of your games anyway. But I get it.
Mhm.
Advertising, marketability. If you can make a nice looking game, it's a lot easier.
I mean, that's really the core thing is that in the last 10 years, so many development studios have chased after that cinematic experience for gaming, where a lot of them have just become iterative. They're these third person action adventure style games where there's really no distinction between them outside of the name on the box. But those were the games finding a lot of financial and commercial success. And that's what they all chased after. But then the budget started going higher and higher. You hired more writers, you were getting more developers, you were doing more advanced mocap and hiring, actors to do voice acting. I'm talking like prestigious actors to do these roles. And you were just pouring money into these projects because in the back of their minds was they were basically saying, if we invest this much and we make this game like the avatar of video games, we're going to make a lot of money. But you can't do that every single year because you're going to get that saturation point like you're seeing with the Marvel, universe. People are getting tired of certain things and they're ready to move on. And that's what's kind of happening with video games as well. We're waiting for that next innovation. We want something new and exciting. We're tired of the same old regurgitation of the same genre in the same delivery type. Change things up, get experimental again. As you put in a tweet a few days ago, when you look towards that latter half of the PlayStation 2 generation into the first half of the
Mhm,
360
mhm.
generation, that was a golden era of gaming. There was so much creativity and innovation in the gaming landscape that we have not seen throughout the PlayStation 4 or the current generation with PS5 and Xbox Series. This is just a continuation of the last generation. We're not seeing any innovation in gaming or the way we're interacting with gaming. And that's a shame. That's naturally going to bring fatigue and just a reset period because you have to change things up. People are going to get bored. And you can look to Pal World, a game that's really not good,
Yeah, Nate
but
hates it.
yes, it brought in a ton of people because it was something unique enough to them. It was Ark with Pokemon and guns and fire, but it was creative, even if it was borderline plagiarism in a lot of
You know
different
what? You know what
ways.
game I like how you just said it's creative, but it's also borderline. But I think about in terms of creativity in that time period you mentioned for the PS2, and it's not a good game, but it does make me go, we did have some weird creative stuff back then. Is Mr. Mosquito on the PS2?
Hmm.
It's so dumb. You're mosquito, just a house mosquito, just annoying these people and completing little objectives and fun stuff they set up in different stages. But it's like back then, somebody said, I'm going to make a game about being a mosquito in a house. And
Hmm.
I don't feel like we see that anymore on that stage. You might see on like a small indie game that pops up on Steam randomly, but I mean one that was actively marketed and like put up on store shelves. And I must be right, Mr. Mosquito was probably next to a Madden title somewhere because it's an M, right? So it's probably in that section
Yep.
next to Madden. And it's like, oh, there's Madden 2003 and Mr. Mosquito. It's just it
What
was
was
an interesting
the
time period.
what was that other game Sony did? Well, like A Dog's Life or something?
Oh yeah, you're a dog. That's right. Like stuff like that. It's I'm not they're not good games, but it's just funny to think about. Be like, someone took a shot. They did. They sat down and actively developed a game about being a mosquito in a house. So
Hmm.
that's
Yeah.
kind of what I think about then. Whereas you mentioned it's very safe, it feels like right now, and just as things cost more and more money, it's like, all right, let's focus group the casual consumer audience, what they like, and that's what
And
we're gonna
yeah.
try to go for, so we can sell the most copies possible. Because they know most if they put the right character or the right IP on the box, most of like the quote unquote hardcore plugged in audience will buy it.
Mhm.
but they do still need to also get the casuals on board. And that's why you see online people complain about yellow paint on walls to show where you got to climb. And it's like, well, they need to
Yeah,
kind of do
I
that
mean,
for the focus group they ran.
yep. Man, I can't believe you brought up Mr. Mosquito. I remember seeing like the EGM review, and they would
Mhm.
always post the same screenshot of the mosquito in the bathroom while the woman's in the tub.
Oh, that's right. Hey, that's easy to market.
But yeah, I mean, the amount of
that's great.
IPs, just new IPs back then, you don't see companies just going that approach anymore. I mean, NBA Street was a new IP during the PlayStation 2 generation, and
Mhm.
it did big numbers for EA because it felt
EA
like a
big.
new modern take on NBA Jam with a unique twist, making it, street basketball and SSX, all those types of things. You're just not seeing it anymore. So hopefully with this recession happening, these budgets can come down and they can look at those development teams. Because if you have a development studio of, let's say, 1,000 people, get them to make 3 games at once.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Use the talent you have there. Say, hey, we can have 4 teams of 250 people making smaller style games. And if that works out for them, this could bring a new, it could be a renaissance for gaming. We can go into a new golden era because we sure as hell are not in the, golden era of gaming right now. We're not even close. We're in a
If EA
bronze
wants
age.
advice, you get the bronze. If EA wants advice, revive EA big, and you'll get a pop out of a lot of the 30 and 40-year-olds.
Oh, if I heard that, think of EA
EA
big.
big, boom. It's like, all right, here's some money.
Let's go.
That's there was one other studio I wanted to mention here, Nate, because this is still kind of confusing to a lot of us, as Toys for Bob has gone independent. And this
Mm.
was a weird one. They just randomly popped up on Twitter and dropped an update on their website, and it's like, we're going indie. It's kind of it made sense when they said it, and everyone was looking around confused. It does appear that they are leaving Microsoft and just kind of going off on their own, but they still mentioned they're going to be working, or at least they're exploring a partnership with Microsoft. I assume that would be the quote unquote second party or contracting sort of relationship where they pitch something to Microsoft, or Microsoft has something that they would work on. Maybe that's a Spyro or a Crash or something like that, Banjo even, or Microsoft come in and fund one of their projects. But this was on the heels of apparently some people at Toys for Bob already having left, and then them not renewing the lease on their building and their offices, so they've gone fully remote anyway. This is an odd one. What'd you think of this, Nate, when you saw it?
It was definitely a standout moment because I'm curious as to how the conversation went between Toys for Bob and Microsoft to make this happen. Because this seems like the perfect studio for Microsoft to have. This would allow them to get into that youth market with some mascot characters, be it Banjo, Spyro, Crash, or even a new unique IP. So to let them go independent, I really wish I could have been a fly on that wall just to see how this was pitched and why Microsoft approved of this. Because Toys for Bob is definitely a valuable studio for Microsoft to have that ownership of, but I mean, something happened to allow them to get their independence. But as they said, they are exploring those possibilities of partnering with Microsoft on future projects and such. So it's going to be interesting to really gauge the future of Toys for Bob and where their first game goes, if it is something that Microsoft contracts with them, or if they go to another third party publishing studio, or find themselves with Sony or Nintendo developing some type of project. But we know the talent that studio has. I'd say the silver lining to all this is that Toys for Bob is now free of doing any Call of Duty asset
Oh
work.
gosh, I know, right?
They
That's
can,
what I thought immediately.
Mhm. Like
They
they
don't
can
make
go off
trees
and
and trash cans in Warzone anymore.
yeah, they can go off and do what they do best with those 3D type platforming games. So I'm definitely curious what their first project will be. And ideally, Microsoft will make a deal with them because they're the perfect studio just to bring that youth market to the Xbox brand. So it's going to be curious when we see their first thing. I would gauge what, maybe 2 to 3 years. We'll see what Toys for Bob is really up to because they're not a big studio. And
I I'm confused here, Nate, about this whole thing because you're right. This is something I would have loved to have at least heard how this went down, like you said, fly on the wall. Because I'm trying to make sense of it and picture it in my mind. And the only thing I think of, and I think Brian in the chat brought this up, that they were essentially going to be shut down, or I kind of feel like they were going to be vicarious visioned, quote unquote, where they were going to be merged into another studio, and maybe they would have been allowed to like remote work, but or maybe they would have had to have moved somewhere or transfer, something like that. And it would have had, I feel like it would have had to have been a collective effort where they had a meeting with toys, like at Toys for Bob, like the people are running the studio there, and they're like, do we want to do this, or do we all just want to say, look, we're either going to quit, we're all going to leave, you can shut us down and we'll go make our own studio, like how we see so many of these so many of these
Mm.
studios that dissolve or whatever, what they end up doing after getting shut down is go make their own thing. Or can we leave with the name and we'll be able to work in like a contracting second party kind of relationship? And I almost wonder if Microsoft just said, you know what, yeah, sure, we did, like we're what we're gonna do anyway, we're either gonna get rid of you guys, or we can avoid all of that press, or and you guys can just take the name, and maybe there was some money exchange. I don't know how that works with that. And here we now have Toys for Bob free of Call of Duty. You know what? The only thing that annoys me is I almost wonder if like Vicarious Visions would have been able to do the same thing if it wasn't too late to where they're now Blizzard Albany, or if this was legitimately just a very rare and unique occasion that happened behind the scenes with Toys for Bob.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say at this point. I would say this may just be one of those unique situations of how this really unrolled and happened. And yeah, as you said, it's a shame that Vicarious Visions couldn't have found a similar fate. But
Yeah. Well,
it's it's definitely something that no one would have anticipated to see happen.
you know, so Toys for Bob is saying they're exploring a contract or something with a project with Microsoft. And now I'm trying to figure out what they go off and do on their own. Do they do a new intellectual property? Do they work on Spyro? Do they work on Crash? Do they work on Banjo? I'm not really sure what the future is right now for Toys for Bob, but they left some hints in their most recent post that seem to imply something with Spyro. So I maybe that's what they've been working on, and like it's completed or it's about to be finished up, and they're like, all right, we're good to go, we're out. Or they're working contractually to finish it up.
Well, that'd be the
But
thing. Like, let's explore that consideration that they are working on Spyro,
mhm,
and it's in conjunction with Microsoft ABK. Now, naturally, I think it would be safe to assume that the next Spyro game would be multi-platform.
yep.
Would this help Microsoft kind of alleviate that multi-platform release discussion by saying, well, this is an independent studio, though
Ah.
we own the property because it's not under Xbox Game Studio, it's more flexible for that to go multi-plat.
It could be. I mean, I think Spyro in general makes sense multi-plat. Like to me, Spyro, if you can get it to run, should be on the Switch. It's 140 some odd million install base that would, I think, work really well for a 3D platformer like that. It would be weird not to put it there. But yeah, that's a good point. But at the same time, their relationship would be very similar to what Nintendo has with many of those studios. Like
Hmm.
any intelligent systems, any of them that they work with, they don't own them. They just
Right.
contract like have contracts with them, and that's it. And that's kind of the way I feel like Microsoft might operate then with Toys for Bob at this point, where they don't have to deal with the day to day or the payroll or anything there. They provide the money for the contract that they've agreed to, and then they eventually have a game delivered.
Hmm.
So that's I feel like that's still something that Microsoft should continue exploring anyway, just contracting out some different studios and test them out and see how they do. But Toys for Bob, hey, I'm happy to hear that they're not going to be working on Call of Duty anymore, because that is that's something that's always annoyed me about the Activision Blizzard machine, is it was so focused on Call of Duty that the studios that had no business working on it just got roped into it because it had to come out that holiday. So I'm happy for Toys for Bob if they will legitimately get to go down some creative paths with this.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, they can do some creative things, maybe make a new IP. And partner with any studio or publishing house that makes the most sense for them, be it a Sega. Maybe they try to make a 3D Sonic game if that
Oh,
opportunity ever came their way. But no, it's definitely exciting times for the developers at Toys for Bob because they get to be creative once again and they can shop around new game ideas to those interested. And, you know, Microsoft will definitely be one of those companies who's going to be very invested in the projects that Toys for Bob has in their pipeline. So this could be a good opportunity for Microsoft to get involved and see what they have there and make Game Pass deals or what have you to bring the games to the Xbox as well and secure them as exclusive games just without the ownership of the development studio. So a lot of curious things could happen here, but it's just going to be a while before we see any fruits from this labor.
yeah. I wouldn't mind even a private investor coming in and they can make their own IP. I'd be kind of curious to see what Toys for Bob could come up with their own character design. And I mean, we saw what happened when Playtonic went off and they made ukulele. So hopefully it doesn't end up kind of like that where it's sort of forgettable. But I'd like to see. Why not? Take a shot. We're asking for creativity in general from the industry. So Toys for Bob, pretty creative, very good at 3D platformers. Let them take a shot. Let them take a shot. Let me move over here, Nate, to the I think we've talked about this a few times, but the Xbox Series X all digital console rumored for this summer now, and apparently they're going to flip it to being a white console, and that's kind of all we have. We don't have pricing, nothing there. This is from Xputer, and that means that they would, I assume, announce it in the next month or two, but who knows? Maybe it's their June showcase and they just launch it the following month in July.
They
But
have done that before. Was it during the Xbox 360 generation? They did a few shadow drops of different models.
yeah, I mean, it's not. I assume it wouldn't do anything in terms of graphically enhancing games, but if they do have like Wi-Fi 6, I think was something that was mentioned, different South Bridge and a different controller. Okay, those are some features in general, but I assume they would pump up the storage capacity to 2 terabytes, leave the pricing the same, and just roll with an all digital system. So I I gotta see it at this point. We've talked about the rumors around this for a bit and the implications for it, but I figured that was at least worth throwing in there because it's something to keep an eye out for. I
Like I have very little
Mhm.
little vested interest in it because one, I have an Xbox Series X.
Right.
So this digital model really doesn't mean anything to me. My only curiosity would be, is this going to full on replace the current Series X in retail and even digital storefronts? And if they do offer this model, are they also going to bring a disc add-on, even if it is just, limited availability, to allow people that option just to see how Microsoft really approaches this? Or is it, truly going to be a digital only system similar to the Series S or PlayStation 5 digital edition? But at the moment, it's just kind of a case of this has no impact on me. The Series X is still out there for anyone who is interested in physical media. It just feels as though, yeah, it's another option, it's another SKU for individuals to consider. But it's also going to come down to pricing, how Microsoft positions it, and a lot of factors. So if it is to come this summer, we'll talk about it obviously once it is officially announced. But right now, with so few details to go on, it's kind of just a whatever type of release for me at the present.
Right. Yeah, I'd be more curious if there was a detachable disk drive for it or something. Just I don't know, that'd be kind of weird. But I'd be curious about that. And then if they end up discontinuing the current Series X in like a year afterwards, and then it's just nothing but digital systems that they're selling, because to
Mhm.
me, that would be a major indication as to what we're going to see going into the next generation for Microsoft, potentially holiday 2026, where there'd be no disk drive with it. And I kind of feel like they've been putting out some messaging to try to support that. Like, hey, these consoles are really the only thing that uses Blu-ray drives anymore. So it's getting hard to find manufacturing for them. And I think that's very calculated the way they're putting that messaging out there.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting
Mm,
future in how, the future of physical media and such, but too many questions at this point, too many unknowns to really formulate any opinion on any direction. We just need to see what Microsoft does, how they communicate it, and really how they position the SKU overall in their grand scheme of things, because as long as the current Series X is sold, let's assume it's there for the rest of the generation. I'm just going to
Mhm.
view it as that secondary option, unless Microsoft takes priority and they push that digital Series X as the flagship system. And that's the one you see stocked, which, I mean, you really can't imagine that's going to be the case. Because why would a retailer want to stock a digital only system?
Yeah, exactly. There's no real point. Uh, oh, the Troy in the chat brought this up, but I should have thought of this earlier. Do you remember the 360 era of $60 games? I wish prices were lower today. The cost technology is so expensive. Is it worth the cost? $70 games from Canada. Oh, they're from Canada, Ontario. I kind of wonder if games are going to go up in price again here in the next 2 or 3 years. Like I think we might go from 70 to 80. So
God.
I kind of think we're moving up again, to be honest, which would be a very quick jump considering we were at $60 for so long. And I mean, 2005 is when they made the jump with the 360.
I
And
feel
I kind of feel like we're going to go from 2020 when it started and we moved up to 70. And it'd probably be like 2027, 2028, where we go up to 80.
if they
They're
do
trying to
that
find any
though,
money they can.
if they try to go to 80 legitimately, I feel like there's going to be a bigger outcry than it was for $70. Like it's going to be like you
Mm,
saw with Wendy's trying to do the Uber style menu where the prices would
okay.
fluctuate throughout the day.
Hmm.
Because right now, $70 is still kind of a significant hit for people. People are approaching the games they're buying with a little bit of hesitancy to say, do I have to buy this game day one at $70? Or can I wait 6 months and get it 50% off for $35 or $40, where it's a little more easy to consume? You raise the price to $80, I think you're going to see a sizable percentage of gamers say, I'm not buying this game at day one. I don't need to buy it that bad to be part of that day one conversation. And if it does go to $80, it kind of plays into Microsoft where
Hmm.
Game Pass value increases
Well,
because that
I what's
really makes
interesting
Game
isn't
Pass.
wasn't Baldur's Gate 3, wasn't that 80? Isn't that 80 physical?
I believe so, yes.
I think it
I
is.
think
I
it
feel like it
is.
is. Someone
But
can
they give
correct me
you a
if it's not.
lot of stuff.
That's how I would do it. I would give a lot of stuff that's not worth much. That's
But
how
then
I'd do it.
But as the consumer, aren't you going to look at the like, I really don't need an art book and a steel book and
Are you
stickers and a
sure you don't?
flag and a blanket and sneakers all for
Did you see that?
$95?
Did you see that physical edition on Xbox might be 4 discs?
Yeah.
They mentioned it, and I was like, "Wow, it's gonna be 4. That's crazy!" And it's like got flashbacks of Final Fantasy 13 there and Lost Odyssey. But it's just that's the other thing with Microsoft. I'm telling you, with these physical games, they didn't apparently think to have some sort of like 100 GB disc available like the PS5 does. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, why not? Why didn't you have that available? What was the plan here from the beginning?
But you see,
I don't
like,
know.
Boulder's Gate is kind of an interesting example, only because let's
Mhm.
say it had a retail physical release day one and it was $80.
Mhm.
And naturally, you would have to assume the digital copy would also be $80. Would it have found the success that it had with those price points?
Mm.
Like, it's
Well, let
tough
me.
to do in retrospect. Because I
Yes.
feel as though they're positioning Baldur's Gate 3's physical release kind of as that collector's edition. It's going to be
Mhm.
people who want to double dip. It's not for new interest. It's for people who have already invested 200 hours into Baldur's Gate 3 and they just say, hey, I can get a physical copy, so I'm going to buy one.
Mm. I don't know because like Nate, you made a tweet the other day about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as it was the
Mhm.
idea of it being just on the PlayStation was brought up, right? And you mentioned if Microsoft hasn't made the Xbox Series a welcoming place for Square Enix games, then Square is in their right to skip the platform. Now we have seen some other games kind of skip the Xbox platform recently. Things like Gundam Breaker and yes, many games coming out of Japan. But if you look at the sales in Japan for the Xbox, there's probably a reason for that with their own market research. But you with that mention, with what exactly are you saying with the idea that it's not necessarily could potentially not be made a welcoming place for Square Enix?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, It's kind of one of those double-edged sword type conversation points because the natural rebuttal would be, well, Square Enix hasn't put anything worthwhile on the Xbox to get the base interested in their games. And in turn, that's why Square Enix isn't putting games on it. And this is a conversation that Nintendo fans have had dating back to the N64. And it was very prevalent on the Switch as well as during the Wii U and Wii generation, where it basically boiled down to, if you give us the game, we will buy it. But the companies are looking at the audience and the demographic on the platform saying, there's not enough interest from that audience and the install base for us to justify a port. So when you look at a title, let's say Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, if you're Square and Sony is willing to give you money to make this a timed exclusive, naturally Square Enix is going to accept those terms because there's uncertainty as to what percentage of the install base on the Xbox Series would have interest in this title. That's not dismissing the possibility that this would come to the Xbox family of systems once the trilogy is complete on the PlayStation.
That might be
But we
that might be 12 discs long then.
but you can look at a more recent example like Octopath Traveler 2. Octopath Traveler came to the Xbox. It was on Game Pass.
Mhm.
So now a couple of years later they announced the sequel, and it was announced for Switch and PlayStation. And people were very, confused as to why was it skipping the Xbox at the time. The natural conclusion should be, what were the sales of Octopath Traveler when it came to Xbox? Because if it were low, naturally Square Enix is going to say, we made the Game Pass deal with you. There wasn't that much interest, so we're not going to bring the sequel. Now that has changed.
Right.
Microsoft was able to court Octopath Traveler 2 to come to Xbox, I believe Game Pass, and it's supposed to be out in the spring, so it should be within the next couple of months. But if that took Microsoft approaching Square to make this deal happen, it means Square themselves didn't see that sizable of an audience of interest to just bring the game over by default. And we saw it with Pixel Remaster. They put a lot of Final Fantasy games on Game Pass. A few years ago, you had Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13. You had all those games on Game Pass. Now, how many sales did these games net? If you have to assume that if they had fairly significant sales, that Square would have been there day one with something like the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Collection, because that's not going to be an expensive port. That's going to be a very minimal investment. But had they seen a good return on those previous Final Fantasy games, they would have looked at such a release and say, okay, we know we can bring this to the Xbox and we will make our money back. For them to have hesitancy means they didn't have any sense of confidence that they would definitely make that money back and it wasn't worthwhile. Now that has probably once again been revisited. Maybe Microsoft has made a Game Pass deal with those types of releases, so now it is something that Square Enix will have interest in doing. But it's on the console manufacturer to make an inviting home for the publishing partners to bring their games. It took Nintendo up to the Switch to make a platform that had enough adult representation to have Bethesda bring titles like Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, for Rockstar to bring Grand Theft Auto and LA Noire to the platform. PlayStation just gets these things by default because they typically always have the largest install base. And the 360 and such, they largely benefited from having a big install base, having a very active install base, especially in the Western markets. But you could even look at the Final Fantasy games on 360 and Xbox One. They were selling, maybe 10, 15% versus the 85%, 90% that Sony
Hey,
was
I bought
doing.
it on the 360 when 13 came out. I enjoyed the crunchy cutscenes and everything.
But it's like, they do have that history with saying, okay, it's never been that big of a platform for us, and we're just not seeing as though anything has changed. Microsoft has done a very good job at catering more to that Japanese audience this generation. They've gone to Atlas to get the Persona games. They've gone with Sega and getting the Yakuza and Like a Dragon games on Game Pass.
Yep.
They are working with Square Enix closely now. They are making their strides. They're putting in the effort. It's just going to take a long time to be able to convince, especially Japanese companies, that there is a base on this Xbox platform for their games where gamers will play them, where they will buy them. And it can't strictly just be when they make a Game Pass deal because you're writing a check to get the game on there. You're using that to lure in people to say, look, there is an audience. Bring us Persona 6 day one, and you will see, good sales from our platform, and you will
Do
make your money back.
do you think there's any do you think there's more interest in the idea of them doing a hybrid handheld system just based
Mhm.
on what they've observed in Japan with sales for something like that? I mean, obviously, I know Nintendo's branding
Mhm.
is key for that selling as well as it has, but at this point, Microsoft's just looking for, I mean, a tiny, tiny fraction percent of what Nintendo's accomplished with the hybrid concept. I almost wonder if that would even be something that Microsoft would look at and be like, maybe even just the concept and convenience would be enough to help us overcome what's really become a 1 million unit wall in Japan for them with their systems now, since the
Mhm.
360 was the only thing that got over that. Maybe like, I wonder if just a hybrid system would help them do it, and maybe that would garner them more interest from Japanese publishers and developers. Then,
I think a handheld system from Microsoft would do well in Japan. And, maybe they just have to find a different type of branding for the region, which we have seen like in China. Nintendo
mm.
sometimes changes the branding. You partner with Tencent to distribute. So maybe if Microsoft can change the branding a little bit in Japan for their handheld system, just because the Xbox brand doesn't exactly, it's not like as though the name generates a lot of interest in Japan. But
Well, it wouldn't
I,
even be an Xbox anymore. It wouldn't be a box.
right. So you could really call it anything.
Yeah,
So that would be an
interesting.
interesting thing. And if you have all the same games, you have the portable Like a Dragon, you have portable Persona and such, that would definitely have a significant interest base in Japan. Now, that's also dependent on, is the pricing good? Is the battery life good? Is
Mm.
it, depending on the size of the unit
To be fair, the Switch
itself?
launched with like 3 hours of battery life back then. So if they get three
Right.
hours out of the thing, technically they're there.
And as long as it's not this big clunky thing like a ROG Ally, I think it
Yeah.
could do well in Japan if it's positioned and priced fairly. It's,
Hey,
I mean,
they're
it's definitely a
partnered and
direction Microsoft has to go in, I think.
I think so too. They're partnered and they're making custom chips with Intel now. So who knows? Maybe there's something there in 4 or 5 years or something. I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
Mhm.
Achievement did ask who was the next Xbox spin-off studio. Like, who would be, if you had to take a guess, who'd be the next studio to pull a Toys for Bob? I guess they asked maybe like Arcane or something there.
No, Arcane's way too prolific. If I had to just a random guess, and it pains me to
Yeah.
say,
Hmm.
Tango.
Oh, Tango, you might be right about that one. That is a shame because Toys for Bob and Tango are like two of the most unique studios that Microsoft has. I kind of feel like Toys for Bob. I almost wonder if it was just being viewed as more support studio than anything. Whereas Tango, I don't think Microsoft view them as support at all. I kind of feel like they're looking at them as, hey, let's make you guys like one of our big time studios in the future because of what they've been able to turn up. So we'll see. We'll see what they come up with in their next project after Hi-Fi Rush to follow it up. That'll tell us a lot about how Microsoft feels about Tango.
Mhm.
Blue Knight says, I've been playing rare games on NSO. Seems like Xbox would do better if it would just put its library of owned IPs to work instead of laying off developer staff who could put them to work. Well, probably. Yeah. I would love to see them go back more and more into this catalog of titles they have currently. But even so, let's say if they were like, you know what, we hear you, Blue Knight on YouTube, but we're gonna start now. You'll hear from us in 3 or 4 years. That's kind of the thing, is stuff is probably happening right now that we just won't know about for half a decade. And then we'll look back and be like, oh yeah, we were talking about that way back when.
Mhm.
It takes so long for these games to come out. It's unfortunate that the industry is so secretive that they couldn't be like, hey guys, we're starting development. We'll see you in 5 years. Like, they can't even do that. It's like they just,
Like some
yeah.
companies try it. It's just the way that how the community responds to such things because we can use Nintendo as an example. They announced Metroid Prime 4.
Yeah.
It at
Well,
least let people say, "Hey, we're working on this. We will give you an update when we can." And if the gaming industry really took that note from the movie industry of just, here's our outline for the next 5 or 6 years. Like, oh, cool. This is what Rare is working on. This is what the Coalition is doing. And Microsoft has kind of done that to a minimalist extent, where they have come out each year and said, okay, we're working on Perfect Dark, we're working on Fable. I would imagine
Like
this year they would come out in June and
like
say,
a
we're working on the next Gears of War.
like a progress update.
Yeah, it's the problem just turns
Oh.
into, and we've seen it since 2020 when they showed, Hellblade 2, and then when we saw Perfect Dark, is that every single year people will ask, well, where's an update? How come we haven't seen it?
You know
What's
what?
going on? Is the game in trouble? They announced it when they did to hire people.
You know
Y-
what's interesting about that, Nate? You know how they had XO for a while and they kind of went on the back
mhm,
burner now? Like,
mhm,
that would be an interest. So the one development I'm thinking of is with Dead Space when they did the remake. If you follow
mhm.
on their YouTube channel, they were incredibly open about how everything was happening. Like they showed you some of the worst like asset visuals and stuff. Like it was just like a blue block, and they showed you how it would move around,
And it
and it was
benefited
interesting to
them.
yeah.
It
But I'm
benefited because they
thinking
got a
like,
lot of community feedback saying, do you like the
mhm,
sound effect of the gun? And the community said, no, you have to change it. And then they changed it. And we had that presentation. They said, which one do you prefer, one or two? And they kept refining the game based on how the fans were responding.
I so they had XO for a while, right? And they put it on the back
Hmm.
burner. I must wonder if XO could come back as a yearly thing that's yes, more based around community outreach, the fans, that sort of thing. But what if some of these studios just showed up and they were like, here's a progress report on Perfect Dark. We're going to show you this level we're working on that has like fill in the blank assets and audio that's not quite right, and like the animations aren't all there, and we're going to kind of show you what we've been working on just so you guys can see. And it's like they kind of learn a bit about the
Hmm.
experience. And it's almost like an hour long presentation you can sit in on, and it's just part of the show.
I
Something like
th-
that's interesting.
it's interesting to the grounded gamer. The
But I
fear,
assume
I
those are the
think, would
people who are
turn
showing up for
into,
XO, right?
ideally, yes, but I think the fear would then turn into, you have the YouTubers who want outrage and drama who'd say, "Oh my God, look how bad that asset looks. Does this mean the game looks and runs like shit?" It's not final. Like we saw the reaction to the Grand Theft Auto 6 leak,
Yeah.
where they
Yeah.
like,
That
people, this is 3 years old. These are stand-in assets, and they're like, this game looks terrible. And it exposed a lot of people that they just don't know how development works with
it was
games.
impressive too. People were like, "Oh my gosh, I got to rethink everything I've ever done in gaming. If this is like
Hmm.
their pre-alpha, it looks almost like a finished game for some of the developers out there who saw it."
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the thing where you do run that risk. But at the same time, I wish the industry was that transparent, because I believe it was Ninja Theory had been, they gave a few development updates on Hellblade 2 over the years. Sometimes they would post updates on
Mhm.
Project Mara on their YouTube channel and such. So certain studios do like doing this. It's just, for whatever reason, the industry is so adverse to giving these progress reports and status updates. And sometimes it is because there is that always fear of a project can get canceled. How many times has Microsoft canceled
I
Phantom
get that.
Dust?
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. But then we're left wondering, what was it? Like what happened there? Like I would
Right.
have loved to see what was so messed up with that first Metroid Prime 4 outing. I've just been
Yeah.
so interested to see. And that's we'll never know. Well, maybe we'll know in 10 years when there's a random interview that happens. And they're like, oh, okay,
Mhm.
this is
Yeah,
why.
we'll
But
see a vertical
I don't know. Like,
slice and stuff. And
it's
I mean, even we can even go this past week. Wouldn't you love to know the state of the Twisted Metal game at
yes,
Firesprite?
that'd have been really interesting just to see what their idea.
Yeah.
What was your plan? That could actually at times maybe flip the ideas internally and be like, oh, maybe we won't cancel this game. People are interested. Like
Hmm.
I don't know, just to even test the water, get some reception on it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and
It-
that's the thing. It's
they, I wonder if they underestimate the average. Okay, maybe not. But I almost wonder if they
no.
underestimate some of the people out there who, they might even get people interested in game development with it. I don't know. It seems it's something to think about. I think it would be
Hmm.
good for the industry, is what I'll say, as opposed to being so secretive all the time. My gosh, it's
Yeah, I mean, I
like,
remember going back to, what was it, 2000, 2001, when Nintendo bought Retro, and seeing all the projects that Retro had in development for the GameCube beyond Metroid Prime. You had Raven Blade, you had
yeah,
their Twisted Metal knockoff, they had a football game. None of these games came out, but you got to see some screenshots of them say, yo, or like remember Nintendo with Project Hammer? How many times did we see that game until it just got shelved?
Yeah.
And
I,
Disaster Day of Crisis, the game Reggie wouldn't let come out in America. Everyone else got it, but not us. Thanks, Reggie.
well, thanks, Graham, man. I'm not gonna read that out loud, but I appreciate it. Hey, shout out to Rerez coming through. Just want to hear anything. Yeah, we definitely want to hear anything from Perfect Dark. Rerez. Even at this point, you know what? I'll take a trailer just explaining where the story is. Whatever. If they can't show gameplay, just something to even show that it's still alive and breathing at this point. I mean, I assume it is, but I mean, you see the industry now. Who knows? Who knows?
I mean, I'd be very surprised if 2024 came and went without an update on Perfect Dark.
Okay, great. A June showcase. That's where I'll look toward. 3 months maybe from now, we'll have heard about Perfect Dark. But
at the latest, I would say the Game Awards, which is literally the latest it could be.
That is quite late. That is in December.
But that's where it debuted, so that could be where we get the next.
But it's so many things. Like right now, that we almost had the potential of there being 3 systems coming out this year. We're in March, and we don't know about any of them. Like we were going to get one from Microsoft with this digital Xbox. We're going to get the PS5 Pro and maybe Nintendo system. And we don't know anything about what's going on with them. It's such a weird industry to be in sometimes because of how secretive everything's got to be cloaked and dagger. And it's like, what is going on here?
See, like my only hesitancy on having Perfect Dark in June is that I'm going into June with the expectation of getting, like an update on Fable and getting that first trailer of Gears of War.
Okay, yeah, no.
And at some point, it just becomes too good of a showcase.
Too good.
Because you have to figure we're going to see Avowed and Indiana Jones.
Microsoft
and stuff.
They should work to have those kind of showcase. It's too good. It can't be too good for Microsoft. Just put it out
there. There's way too much goodness in this one showcase.
Just don't say the next 12 months. Don't say that. Otherwise, you can show what you want. Let's not get crazy with that.
Show
those kind of things.
Everything you want. Show us games come out in 2028.
Just don't say they're coming out in the next 12 months.
Not if it includes Hollow Knight.
Okay. Oh, yeah. We still need Silksong. Man. What if this is from Necro Banana says, what if Microsoft makes a new Game Pass tier that includes development footage for fans of certain games? Like make it $3 or $4 more bucks development footage. Like there are fun little benefits they could probably explore. I don't know. I would be interested in kind of the behind the scenes stuff, but I will tell you, Necro Banana, guess what? That used to just come on the disc. It used to be as part of it. You would unlock it in the game.
Developer diaries.
Art, how this was made, and you would go through and you would just watch it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But
Naughty Dog just did it with The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah, but like, I mean, in general, we've been them trying to monetize that would feel kind of weird, to be honest, for them to do that. Yeah. So I don't know. I get what you're trying to say. You're trying to find more value in being transparent and adding in the Game Pass. And if it's just something they throw in there, that'd be cool. But yeah, that's I think there's a missed opportunity for XO and doing the fan connection stuff correctly, not just on social media or apparently just messaging someone on Xbox. Phil. Johnny says, Nate, does milk live up to the hype? Coffee milk.
Coffee milk, yes, it lives up to the hype. Coffee milk is one of the greatest creations of humankind.
Okay. There you go. Yeah, those used to be unlockable, Spyro. You're right. And those were the good days when it was an unlockable.
The golden age.
Yeah. The Mega Man collection on the PS2, you would unlock an entire episode of the show.
It sounds like punishment.
It's on the PS2. Nah. I mean, I wasn't going to win an Oscar, but it was still fun. It was still
going to win anything.
Well, that's DirectXbox for tonight. A bit of I don't say a downer episode because of all the stuff that's happened this week, but it was a week for gaming. It was something. Hopefully we don't see too many more weeks like these, but something tells me it's not really going to be letting up too much over the next couple of months. But hey, we got the summer showcase coming up for Microsoft. We got some games coming up in March, so we'll have some stuff to go over then. In fact, actually, I think the next time we're on, Nate, Battlefront's out. Battlefront will have been out. So
I think
there
so,
you go. We
yeah.
can talk about the Battlefront collection. I'm excited for that. You don't like Star Wars at all, so who knows what you think about it? But I
Not a
do like
Star
Star Wars.
Wars person.
Well, that's fine. Anyway, that's Nate. Thanks for tuning in. We will be on the Spawncast bonus show, or the after show was bonus show. That'll be live here in a few minutes. I posted it up over on the Patreon, so you can head over there. It'll be a link to the stream. We're just going to hang out and chat about whatever. So head on over there. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Make sure you check out patreon.com/Spawncast, spawncastnetwork.com. Shout out to the Game Orb once again for sponsoring, and we will see you guys in a couple of weeks with hopefully some better news and some talk about Battlefront. And we'll see you guys then.